Let's do a Wild playoff preview with beat writer Sarah McLellan from the Star Tribune. We know, Sarah, that they'll begin Sunday in Vegas. As of Tuesday night, there were a lot of things still in play, Sarah. It could have been Winnipeg, could have been nobody, but it is Vegas. This team, as you wrote in the game story after they outlasted the Ducks 3-2 in overtime, at least just getting to overtime clinched the spot for them, but they don't do anything easy, do they?
It was a fitting end to a real tumultuous season, obviously going down to the very last game, the last game and the first game, November 10th, that they had everyone available. So obviously those injuries, really testing and trying this team all season long. But yeah, they had the chance to clinch, against Calgary last weekend, and then another opportunity against Vancouver, and just to keep their own fate in their own hands. And it just wasn't lining up for them until obviously that goal with 20 seconds left in regulation in the third period by Joel Eriksson Ek, just to get them the point they needed and extend the action to overtime, where they ultimately won, like you said. But if that hadn't happened, it would have been a very suspenseful situation for them to see what would have happened in Calgary's last game Thursday against Los Angeles, and really just, having their fate decided by another team's result. It could have been really dicey, but obviously they avoided that. Now they get some rest, some practice time to prepare for Vegas, which is obviously a reunion from the 2021 playoff series that did go 7 games with the Golden Knights ultimately winning, but some teams obviously with a little bit of history there.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of frame this, Sarah, around, a few reasons the Wild should be optimistic, but then also a few reasons why Vegas is certainly the favored team in this series. And, it could be, again, a quick exit. But I think the first thing we pointed out already is this team, when healthy early this season, was playing at a caliber of, a top 5, top 7 team in the league, even at a certain point, like the best team in the league at a certain pace. I don't know if we thought that they were the best team in the league, but they were playing at a very high level and everybody's healthy. Then they get a ton of injuries at various points. The biggest ones, Kaprizov for quite a while, Eriksson Ek, Spurgeon was out for a while. Like various high-level players were out for various parts of this season. They are all healthy now. That's got to be number one on their list of, hey, we can get this done.
They're a different team than the team that faced Vegas 3 times in the regular season and suffered those 3 losses. So Vegas swept the regular season series. But again, they saw the lineup, a Wild lineup that was depleted, where it was missing, Kaprizov, like you mentioned, Eriksson Ek, their defensemen, the big time defensemen in Jonas Brodin or Brock Faber. So they didn't see the Wild, and really, when you put it in perspective, that they really only had a healthy, full-strength lineup for 8 games. Many teams didn't see the Wild at their full potential, really. You mentioned, obviously, there was that run early, such a strong start when they mostly had everyone. And they were atop the league. They were ahead of Vegas in the standings at that time when they were battling for first overall. So we'll see if they're able to kind of get back to that level. They only had 4 games for Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov to come back late. Obviously, last game was the only time they had everyone, as this lineup back together, being fully healthy and having all their options available, plus Zeev Buium now. So we'll see if they can get back to that. But I also think, looking at the schedule now, they've had, like I said, some days of rest. All 3 of those games were back-to-backs. For the Wild, the second half of back-to-backs. So you factor travel in there, playing 2 games in 2 nights. So we'll see if this maybe levels the playing field a little bit, but still Vegas is where Vegas is for a reason. The Golden Knights are considered a contender. Not only do they have a really strong offense, but they're really stingy defensively. They're strong in net with Adin Hill. They're just very deep and balanced, and especially that power play. It's one of the most dangerous power plays in the NHL. Maybe one of their few rare weak spots is actually their penalty kill. But they also have the muscle memory. This is a team that won the Stanley Cup only a few years ago, and a lot of that core is still in place. And so I think that experience is really dangerous this time of the year, just that players know what it takes. They've been there. It's not so intimidating. The pressure isn't as weighty as maybe for, some first timers or teams that haven't won as much. So it's definitely a formidable matchup. On the flip side, the Wild do have some familiarity too. They do have some holdovers, obviously, from the playoff series that these two teams had 4 years ago. That went 7 games. The Wild fell behind 3-1 in the series and rallied back to at least force a game 7 on the road in Vegas. So, there's some recognition there too. I think also, for the Wild to start on the road is probably not a bad thing. Their home record, obviously, they won more down the stretch at home than we saw earlier in the season, but they got pretty comfortable going into other teams' buildings and finding their structure and letting their structure dictate the way the game would go, rather than just trying to stay afloat with the home team and let the crowd get into it. So they've kind of spoiled that type of home ice advantage this year for a lot of teams. It'll be interesting to see if that carries over into the playoffs, but I don't think they should be, as intimidated by starting on the road as maybe you would expect other teams to be, especially as a wild card team going against, such a top team in the conference.
Oh, it's funny. You mentioned Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov, and I think the last time you and I talked for this podcast, it was right before they were maybe going to make a decision. We didn't know if they were going to play against San Jose. They play. It's an 8-7 game, which is just bonkers. So that's a week's worth of goals for the Wild, maybe more sometimes. Eriksson Ek has 4. Kaprizov has 2, including the overtime winner. So you see the potential for the offense. I don't think they want to get into an 8-7 kind of game in the playoffs. I don't think anybody does. I don't think anybody will. But you can see that the explosiveness came back in a matter of a period or two, as opposed to taking much longer than that. Obviously, they're not going to score 6 goals combined every game, but the possibilities are there now that these guys are back.
Meaningful moments too, meaningful contributions. 4 goals in that game, 6 combined between Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov. So you take that away, and that's a lopsided loss. Most recently, obviously, Eriksson Ek's goal with 20 seconds left to seal and pick up the point that the Wild needed to extend their season. And then Kaprizov orchestrating and assisting on the game-winning goal in Vancouver in overtime, setting up his longtime linemate, Matt Zuccarello, in overtime to cap off that rally after the Wild was, we're down 2-0 in the third period. So they're making a difference. It's not, insignificant points that they're just racking up. You can see the difference they have, and it really kind of illuminates what the Wild was missing, because these are, game-breaking plays. And when the margin, of error was so slim for them, and they were losing these 1-goal games, and they were playing so well defensively, but just didn't have that offensive punch to get on the other side of these games. Now they do have that. Now we see, Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov, and then their line mates, Matt Boldy and Matt Zuccarello, getting involved in obviously making these clutch plays at real clutch time. So I think that, not to mention just the fact that they helped the Wild secure the points that they needed to advance. I think just them getting in the groove again and getting in the rhythm of playing that type of way, stepping into those big moments and carrying and leading the team, that's got to be good reps for them for playoff time.
No, you mentioned Kaprizov, and both of them, I don't know if we know exactly where they are health-wise. They're back. Kaprizov, with those shots that he was taking, certainly looked 100%, especially the overtime goal looked like vintage Kaprizov. Do we have a sense for are they healthy enough to play? Are they all the way back? Have they said exactly kind of where their health is at this point?
I think they feel encouraged. And I think for Kaprizov in particular, it was just getting, more time and more games. And, from how he felt in the first game, mind you, he, had a couple of goals and still said his timing wasn't right there, but still, I think the Calgary game was maybe a turning point for him in the sense that he started to maybe get into the physical action more. You see then, how important it is for him to skate and move his legs. And then you obviously saw them the next night against Vancouver, how explosive he can be in that way. So I think for them, that was important for them to feel like they're back. They can play their game. And that's obviously key for the Wild, for them generating chemistry with their line mates, getting the power play going. I think you'll see it kind of spill over into a number of areas that are obviously vital for this team to have success in the postseason.
I think they made the right call in not playing Buium in the game to get into the playoffs. Like, that's a tough spot to put somebody in. When Faber was thrown into the lineup 2 years ago, it was a different situation, right? Like, everything was kind of wrapped up, locked up at that point, and then he plays a ton in the playoffs. What do we think, if anything, becomes his role in the postseason?
Well, if you look at the way that the team practiced in their first session since clinching, he looks like he's a lineup player. He took line rushes on a pairing, on the third pairing next to Zach Bogosian, and he also worked the point on the first power play unit. So looking at that, it looks like they're obviously very much considering him as an option for game one. Coach John Hines says they're taking it day by day. And he'd have an answer Saturday, obviously ahead of Sunday's game one. But, this was an opportunity, for him to really kind of get those reps on ice. I think especially with the power play, it's always come playoff time. Special teams have a tendency to decide series. We've seen that, especially with this franchise. With how obviously potent Vegas's power play is, there's going to probably be a lot of emphasis on staying out of the box and can the PK continue to step up for the Wild, but also to take advantage, because as I said, Vegas doesn't have a top penalty kill rankings wise in the NHL. They're toward the bottom. So that might be an area that the Wild can really capitalize on and take advantage if they commit penalties. And give the Wild that opportunity. And I think especially with putting Buium on that unit, it gives them a defenseman kind of as an insurance policy, because lately they've been going with 5 forwards. And obviously then you run the risk is, if there's a turnover, someone gets caught, the puck goes the other way, you're having a forward defend, against, maybe a couple forwards or an odd man rush. So having him back there with the experience to know, what to do and how to handle those types of situations, I think just maybe gives them a little bit more of a safety net, while also still giving them, the offensive mindset with that unit with Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, Matt Zuccarello. So I think that could be something that, especially with the team already practicing it, to try to deploy that potentially as soon as game one. I think that's something that they can obviously probably see is it could be a real, changing factor in the series. Special teams, like I said, always are, but for them to be so mindful of that already and giving him the reps, I think that could be a real opportunity for him to help this team so soon, and as recent and soon as his NHL debut.
Yeah, the flip side of it is, like, you run the risk, especially when you have to open on the road. Like, they can pick on him. They can, last change. They see third pair go out there. They're like, okay, here we go. So they probably would have to pick their spots. I don't think they'd throw him out there in like defensive zone draw situations, stuff like that. Like, try to put him in advantageous situations. But anything can happen. Like, even if it's an offensive zone draw, you lose the draw. Next thing you know, you're hemmed in. Like, is that a risk you think they're willing to take? Like, he's a very good two-way player, but he's definitely more of an offensive-minded defenseman if we're talking about his real strength, right?
Yeah, you're talking, I think just about the upside that he could bring. And you're right. I think it's tougher to dictate the matchups on the road. But I think that's, why the top 4 is locked in that as it is, with Jonas Verdeen and Brock Faber and Jake Middleton and Jared Spurgeon. Those are the pairings that can handle a lot of the heavy lifting, that can see those matchups, and they can try to play that matchup game. But I think just having him with that potential, if goals are going to be at such a premium and it's going to get so much harder and Vegas defends so tough that it might just take going 1 for 2 on the power play or capitalizing on that lone chance. And so I think being cognizant of that is important, and it's clearly on their radar for him to get those reps. And the Stanley Cups are different. NHL debut, like, who knows? But, he does have experience on big stages. Not to say that World Juniors and, a Frozen Four are the same as the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I think that's been part of his MO. And I think that's been part of his pedigree and his skill set. And what's appealing, for him to get drafted 12th overall last year and already be a pro is that, the moments haven't been too big for him. In fact, it's when he's really played his best. He's been behind some of the biggest goals for the teams he's been a part of. So especially for game one, to see just right away, how does it work potentially? They have the veterans, in John Merrill and Declan Chisholm with more experience to be able to rotate in if they need. Right. But I think just the upside of what he could do for the power play and that special team showdown is really intriguing, and we'll see if it pans out that way. But especially, like I said, if that's an area where Vegas is a little weak, maybe that's a way for the Wild to really take advantage and find an advantage in the series.
Well, and there's the opportunity there, because if you look at, no matter what the circumstances were, Vegas beat the Wild 3 times this season. The combined score was 12-4, and I'm looking at it right here. Vegas had 4 power play goals, and the Wild had 0. Vegas had second best power play in the league during the regular season. The Wild had the 3rd worst penalty kill. Like that right there is very concerning. So if you have a chance to tilt that in any way, you would imagine it's, hoping that you can equalize or kind of match the output, because this has been, years in a row now. Like the Wild just haven't been able to kill penalties. And is there any reason for them to think that they will be able to do that better? Are they like in a mini groove right now, or like where are they at with their penalty kill right now? Overall numbers tell one story. How are they faring lately?
It's been better, and I think it's been better down the stretch as they've adjusted. Obviously, they incorporated Matt Boldy, Gustav Nyquist. So I think having more of that kind of playmaker vibe to it has helped, just with their aggressiveness and probably really anticipating what players, offensively want to do, having those instincts, from a Boldy to try to intercept a pass and get a clear. So I think they've been better with that, with their execution, just alleviating pressure. But you're right. These battles just get so magnified that, and historically we've seen it. The Wild has not done well in the power play PK showdown. So as much as they can keep this series 5-on-5, that should suit them, because then they can roll their lines. They can go up and down the lineup. They can have, the matchups that they want when they're at home, probably more likely. But just, you see someone like a Marcus Foligno, the impact he's had lately, making sure that he gets his shifts, making sure that he can get in on the forecheck, and have time in the offensive zone and not just be out as a penalty killer. Even that 4th line, newcomer Justin Brazeau, who obviously was a pickup for the trade deadline. It looks in time that he's found more of his niche. He was really key on the Foligno goal in Vancouver. So being able to utilize their entire lineup and just go shift for shift at 5-on-5, I think that's got to be the game plan. Regardless if they get better production from their PK and their power play, but keeping this as even strength as possible, I think is a matchup that, even with Vegas's depth, gives the Wild a better chance to try to take advantage of them and get on offense and get goals.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I think Gustafsson gives them a chance. I think being at full strength gives them a chance. I think if it comes down to special teams, if it becomes a march to the penalty box, that is not going to favor them. They've been generally good, if memory serves, at, even when they start on the road, which they generally have in the postseason. They've often taken one of these first 2, and they generally do make it a series at the very least, because they are built to. They're built, aside from the special teams, which is a big deal. They're kind of built to play in the playoffs. And
they've done well at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas as well. Like, that is a building that can be a tough place to play with the fans there, how loud it is. It can be kind of an intimidating environment for teams, but not the Wild. They've done well there this season aside, although that, as we talked about, it was a tough game coming off a back-to-back and missing some key players, but they've done well there. And so I'm curious to see if they can find that momentum on the road early. And you're right, get a split, get it back home at the minimum for them to feel like they probably accomplished their job going to Vegas for the first 2 games, and just kind of see from there. And you're right, like, that was a game 1 win for them the last time, on the road, these 2 teams played in the playoffs in the first round in 2021. It obviously got tougher, but the goalie that they had trouble scoring on in that series is no longer in Vegas. He is Marc-Andre Fleury, and he's now on their side. Right. So maybe that will be a little bit of a different factor this time around.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure all the beat writers and players and everybody involved is very sad that they're going to Vegas, not getting to spend April in Winnipeg. But those are the breaks, Sarah. I'm very sorry that you have to go to Vegas.
out of our control. I can't control that it's in the 70s and 80s in Vegas. I can't.
These are the burdens you must bear. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. We'll be following your coverage. I'm sure we'll talk somewhere in the midst of the series as well. Good luck, safe travels, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.